Well, good morning and welcome to New Hope. I am so glad that you are here with us. It truly is an honor and a privilege to be able to be here this morning. And I just want to pause for a moment and just say thank you. I know today is Memorial. It's not today. I get it. It's Memorial Weekend. But I'd be remiss if we didn't just say thank you for just the memory of those who we have lost in battle, the lives of those men and women who have served so valiantly so that we can enjoy the freedoms in which we get to enjoy today. We are just so thankful for those who have gone before us and who have paid the ultimate sacrifice and who have given their lives and served for this country. We just want to say thank you this morning for all of those and the families that are represented here this morning. Thank you very much for those who have served this country. We are in the midst of a series. We're actually today's the last Sunday for this series, Mission Impossible. Just really excited about wrapping it up today, not just to finish it, but just the message that we have this morning. And for those who may be visiting or who may have missed a few of the previous messages, you can catch them online at newhopealive.org. You can kind of catch up. You can catch up on the app. The information's there as well. It takes you right to the website. But just very quickly, so week one, we talked about Paul and Silas, these two guys that were on this missionary journey, and they were serving God. They were trying to share the message, the good news of Jesus Christ, and they they just got mistreated. They got beaten, they got thrown in prison, and they're just in the worst possible place, right? In this just impossible situation, like how are we going to get out of here? How will we ever get released from this situation and get saved? And in the midst of this ugly situation, they're praising God, they're praying, and God shows up in this miraculous way, and he does the impossible in and through them. And this jailer that had been responsible for their lives ends up getting saved, gives his life to Christ, his family gets saved, they all get baptized. Just an incredible, incredible story. Week two was this fishing expedition that Jesus decided that he was going to take Simon, John, and James on. They'd been fishing all night. They didn't catch a thing. And Jesus happens to be in this area teaching. And he sees these boats and he says, hey, let's jump in this boat and push out. He says, hey, how about we throw the nets over here? And they're like, man, we've been fishing all night. We didn't catch a thing. But Jesus, because you say so, we'll do it. So they throw the nets over the side of the boat, and just the fish, they can't contain the fish that show up in these nets. The nets are ripping. They're pulling these fish into the boats. The boats are about to sink. Just an incredible, incredible miracle that Jesus performed. Last week, it was Jesus and the disciples. Jesus again, he's teaching, he's healing the sick, and these crowds just are swarming. And Jesus was attractional. Like where Jesus was, people wanted to be. And so he's healing people. And it gets late, and the disciples are like, hey, man, these guys gotta get some food. They gotta take care of themselves. It's getting late. We're out in the middle of nowhere. What's gonna happen here? We can't feed them. And Jesus looks at them and says, you feed them. You take care of them. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, we don't have the resources. All we've got, there's this young boy. He's got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Jesus says, well, bring them to me, and he blesses them. He breaks them apart and he begins handing them to the disciples. The disciples then begin feeding those around them. And it's so incredible, like everybody ate as much as they wanted off of 5 loaves and 2 fish. And at the end, they're cleaning up, right? It's what good Christian people do. They clean up after themselves, right? And they find there are 12 baskets of bread and fish left over. They didn't even start with that much. And so Jesus did this miraculous miracle. Well, this morning, we pick up where that story left off. We are in Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. If you happen to bring your Bible with you, I'd encourage you to open it up to Matthew 14, again, beginning in verse 22. If you don't have a Bible, please feel free to use the one in the seat back in front of you. If you don't have one, period, you are more than welcome. It's our gift to you. I'd love for you to take that Bible with you and just begin reading it. But if you don't have any of those, you've got an electronic device, you got a tablet, or you got an iPhone, you want to use that. We are in the New Living Translation. Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. Last but not least, it will be up here on the screen for your viewing pleasure. Yeah, that was supposed to be funny. Matthew 14. Get myself confused. 14:22. Immediately after this, so what are we talking about here? So immediately after Jesus gets done multiplying the bread and the fish and giving it to the disciples, and the disciples feeding some 20,000 people who had gathered, immediately after this, Jesus insisted that the disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake. Now, if you pause right there for a minute and you say to yourself, like, why did Jesus insist? Like, he was insistent that these disciples get back in the boat and they shove off. Why? Because it doesn't really tell us here in the account of Matthew. So if you take a look, if you look through the book of John, get to John chapter 6, and you begin to read John's account of what happened, John tells us that after Jesus feeds all of these people, I mean, you can imagine, just the buzz, the excitement that this happened, right? And so the people, they were expecting, they were longing, they were desiring this earthly king to come and free them from all this oppression that they had been under. So this has to be the guy, right? It's got to be Jesus. So the people, if you read in John 6, the people were like, they were so insistent. They wanted to force Jesus to be king right then and there. And Jesus knew, because he had not heard from his Father that it was time yet. He knew that it was not time yet for him to step into whatever role maybe they thought his role was going to be. And so he wants to move the disciples on, hey, you guys just get out of here, get going. I will take care of this. I will get things wrapped up. So he gets them in the boat. They shove off. And then it says Jesus kind of stands around and sends the people home, right? Can you hey, thanks for coming today. Enjoyed seeing you. Good to see you. Here, take some leftovers with you. Take a few. You see Jesus kind of sending people off, right? And so he gets the people on their way. Verse 23 says, after sending them home, Jesus went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. So what do we find Jesus doing? Again, think about what just happened. Jesus had been there like all day. He'd been teaching. He had been healing the sick. 20-some thousand, tens of thousands of people there. Remember, okay, it's Jesus, right? Jesus is divine. Jesus is fully God. But we have to remember Jesus is fully man as well. I know how exhausted I get kind of at the end of the day. Kind of, it's a long day. You got a lot of appointments. You got a full day's work. You got a lot of meetings, whatever that looks like in your life. And at the end of the day, you're just exhausted. You're beat. You're whipped. You just want nothing else to do. For me, quite often what I do, and just confess, I just like to just jump on the couch. I don't jump, but I just get on the couch and just turn on TV and just kind of veg out. Right? Find a movie, find a ball game or something, and you just sit there and you just relax. Like, there's nothing else to do. What does Jesus do? What do we learn here from Jesus? Now I get it. Jesus didn't have a 4K, 75-inch TV. He didn't have Hulu, where he could tap into the NBA Finals or something. I get that. But what is Jesus doing? Even if he did have that available to him, my guess is that what we would find Jesus doing is the same thing that we find Jesus doing then. Getting alone, finding time by himself with his heavenly Father. It's convicting for me as I was reading through that this week, thinking about how I kind of get re-energized and how I need to do more of this. I don't know if maybe maybe some of you are similar. We just need to get away with God. We need to get away and spend time in conversation, spend time in prayer with God, just talking with him, just telling him how your day is gone, just telling him what you're struggling with, just spending some time quietly listening for God's voice. Sometimes we struggle with what's God's will for my life? What's my next step? What should I be doing? Sometimes I think our lives are so busy and cluttered that we can't hear God's voice. And so Jesus, we learn from him. Let's get away. Let's get alone. Matthew is specific. He kind of reminds us twice. He says that Jesus got up there himself, and it says he was there alone. I think Matthew's trying to tell us something too. Sometimes we just need to get alone with God. Verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind. I mean, you couldn't plan it, right? I mean, this is how it works. But so the disciples shove off in the boat, and they're making their way across the water, and up comes a storm with strong winds and high waves, and they're just beating against these guys in the boat, and they're trying to make their way across. And Jesus realizes, he sees that they are in trouble. And as Jesus does quite often, Jesus does something about it, right? But here's what's interesting. So these guys had been rowing for a while. If you look back in John chapter 6, we find that they had rowed for 3 or 4 miles, right? So they're like out in the middle of this lake. They're out in the middle of this body of water, 3 or 4 miles from shore. There's a strong headwind coming right at them. This terrible storm has been brewing, and it's just beating against them. If you look at the word fighting here in the Greek, it actually means torture. Matthew uses this word torture, that these guys are being tortured by this storm and the wind and everything coming against them. So it's beaten on them, and Jesus realizes it. He sees them, and it's about 3 a.m. I mean, it's early in the morning or late, depending on how you want to look at it, but about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. Now, my guess is that some of you have probably heard of this. Like you've heard before that Jesus can and did actually walk on the water. But here's what we miss if we don't maybe look at other views of the gospel. So when we think about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so it's like their perspective of what their eyewitness account. So when we just look at Matthew, we miss an important detail that's kind of confusing, and I probably shouldn't even bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. But when you look at Mark chapter 6, I believe it's verse 48, it says that Jesus planned on just strolling right by the disciples. So again, the disciples they're way, way away from shore. They're out in the middle of this lake. The storm's brewing, the wind's coming right at them. They're fighting against it. Jesus sees they're in trouble, but yet Mark 6 tells us that Jesus had intended to just stroll right by. Why? Like, why is Jesus just planning or intending just to walk like hey guys, I'm heading to the other side of the lake. I'll see you when you get there. I'm not sure exactly, but if you look back in Matthew, look at Matthew chapter 8. In Matthew chapter 8, I think it's 23 through 27, we find a similar experience to this. Like the boys and Jesus, they're out on the lake, and as it seems like happened from time to time, a storm kicked up, and these guys, I mean, they're scared because the wind's blowing, the waves are high, and they're like, man, I don't know what's going to happen. The boat's going to bust apart. We're going to die. And where's Jesus? Jesus is sleeping, right? He's like laying down in the boat. He's catching a nap. He's sleeping. And these guys are freaking out like, we're going to die. We got to do something. So they go and they wake Jesus up. Jesus, you got to do something. You got to help us. And Jesus gets up and he says, why are you afraid? You have so little faith. And he rebukes the storm. He rebukes the wind, and it becomes calm. So I wonder if Jesus, if he's thinking as he's strolling across the lake, walking on the water by the guys that are kind of in the same situation, fighting against the storms. And I wonder if he's thinking, did they get it? I wonder if they remembered. I wonder if they at least think back. Do you remember, guys, when we were in the boat together and you were flipping out and you thought you were going to die? You woke me up and I rebuked the storm and it became just so calm on the water. I don't know if that's what Jesus was thinking. That's all I got. I looked and it says scholars, they don't know either. So I don't know what your opinion is, but that's what mine is. But here's the thing is as Jesus is strolling across the water, they see him, right? The guys catch a glance of him walking on the water and they think it's a ghost. Like, what would you think if you're out in the middle of the lake and you see somebody walking? Like, what's going on? And they're terrified. They're just scared to death. Verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." Verse 27, but Jesus spoke to them at once. And I wonder if they remember. I wonder if they remember these similar words that Jesus spoke to them, maybe days, weeks prior. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage. It is I, or I am here. And I imagine when the disciples heard the voice of Jesus and they recognized or realized who it was out on the water, I just assume that there had to have been some sort of calmness come over them. Oh, it's Jesus. It's not a ghost. But then maybe quickly when they realize that it's Jesus, and then they're like, but he's walking across the water. What? How's that possible? This is crazy, scary. Don't be afraid. It's interesting that as you look through the book of Matthew, at least 7 occasions, Matthew reminds or records this same phrase, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Take heart. Take courage. Don't doubt. Don't fear. Jesus says, it is I. We're reminded of this language. If it sounds familiar, you think of this I am here. Back in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, this interaction between God and Moses, right? God is sending Moses to be the deliverer of his people. And Moses is thinking of all these excuses, why it's not me, why I can't go, why I'm not equipped. Like they're not going to believe me. They're going to listen to me. Who should I tell them sent me? And God says, I am who I am. And this is the same language that Jesus uses. I am, or it is I. Verse 28, man, this is what blows me away. Again, try to put yourselves in the shoes of a disciple. Maybe even put yourself, not the shoes, maybe the sandals of Peter. Verse 28, then Peter. So Peter's response to realizing that it's Jesus out on the lake, Peter calls to Jesus and says, Lord, if it's really you, can you think of something else that Peter could have asked to prove just in fact that it was Jesus besides, Lord, if it's you, then call me out on the water. Then tell me to come to you where I can walk on the water as well. Can you think of something else? Like I can, like, Jesus, how about you, not me get out of the boat and walk on the water. Let me put it this way. I don't know, maybe many of you maybe aren't in boats so much anymore as you are in planes. But imagine this. Maybe some of you don't have the same fear that I have in a plane, but imagine this. You fly out of Fort Wayne Airport, you're heading to sunny Orlando, Florida. All right, good. All right. You're heading to Orlando, Florida. You get to like cruising altitude. It's 34,000 feet, right? Everything's going great. Things are going fine. You're going to be there in like 45 minutes. Things like you just can't wait to get there. But then it happens. You hear it. You hear the bing, bing, right? You been there? I hear that noise and I'm like, what's going on? Why is the captain calling the stewardess? What's happening? Like, are we getting ready to lock the beverage cart in again? Or you got to sit down. Nobody's going to the bathroom. What's getting ready to happen, right? That's what I'm thinking. So you hear the bing, bing. And then all of a sudden, things kind of get dark. You kind of start feeling a little bit of this stuff. It starts shaking a little bit. You get the rattle. You're like, I don't like this. I know it's normal. It's just turbulence, but I don't like this. Things get bad. Things are really crazy, right? I mean, you just think, man, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to make it. It's that bad in the plane. And you look out the window and you look over here and you're like, hey, there's Jesus. He's out here walking on a cloud. There's Jesus. Now, let me ask you, what do you do? Now, I know you got to use your imagination. You got to talk through the glass, right? Do you look at Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, if it's you, ask me to jump out of the plane and walk on the clouds with you? Is that what you do? That's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying, hey, Jesus, is that really you? I'm going to stay right here locked into my seat. But is it really you? That's not what Peter does. Peter is bold. Peter's got courage. Peter, he's a little bit crazy, I think. He says, Jesus, if it's you, then call me to come to you walking on water. It's the same guy who, when Jesus asks, who do people say I am? He's the one who says, you're the Christ. You're the Messiah. He's the same guy who is, as Jesus is speaking of his death, Peter pulls him aside and he wants to rebuke him. I mean, Peter is he's the spokesman of the disciples. He is bold. He's just, a lot of times it gets him in trouble, right? He's the same guy who boasted that he would never forsake Jesus. Jesus, I will never disown you. It's Peter who draws his sword and hacks off the ear of the servant of the high priest in the garden. This is who this guy is. He is so bold, but I'm not asking to get out of this boat. So Jesus, verse 29. I don't know. I mean, I put myself in Jesus' shoes. Again, he probably wasn't wearing shoes. He was probably just barefoot. But I think maybe Jesus is thinking, man, Peter is bold. Peter has courage. Man, Peter has great faith. He is willing to step out of this boat. And he's willing to come out here on the water with me. So he looks at Pete and he says, yes. Yes, Peter, come. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. Now, I got to ask you the question, how does Peter get out of the boat? If it's me, I'm slowly edging over the side of the boat, and I'm kind of putting my right foot down. I'm kind of doing this number to see if things are going to be okay, because I'll sink like a bag of rocks. I don't know though. I think Peter grabs the side of the boat and he just flips both legs over and he just starts at it. That's my thinking. It just seems to be his attitude and his personality. And so Peter gets out of the boat and he begins to walk on the water. What an incredible miracle. I'd say it's never been done, but Jesus is doing it right at the moment, right? He's walking on the water towards Jesus. How long do you think he was out there? How many steps do you think Peter actually made before it happened? I don't know. I don't know. But as he's walking on the water, again, the storm is still happening, right? Which again asks, I'm like, questions. So if the waves are doing this number and the wind's going, what are you walking on, right? Like that. I think that's kind of, anyway. I wonder how many steps he got before it happened. Before, in verse 30, it says, but when Peter saw the strong wind and when he saw the waves, it says he was terrified and he began to sink. Now I wonder this too, like he began to sink. So does that mean it was kind of like thick, like mud or quicksand that you just, like he started to slowly to sink, you know? Because again, I'm thinking if all of a sudden it's either on or off, like he doesn't have much time to cry out for help, because if it's like game off, again, he's going poof, right? Like he's underwater in a matter of, milliseconds, right? So it's like he's slowly kind of sinking, and we find Peter crying out to Jesus, shouting, "Save me, Lord," right? This is the guy who asked to get out of the boat. He's the guy bold enough, courageous enough to step out of the boat. He gets out of the boat, and then somehow he loses his fixation upon Jesus, and he starts to pay attention to the storm and the wind and the waves, and he begins to have doubt and to fear and to kind of second guess. Like he's probably thinking, whoa, I'm really walking on the water. And then it's like it hits him, wait a minute, I'm walking on the water. And he begins to sink, and he's not too proud. He's not too proud to look at Jesus, knowing that he's in this situation because of himself, knowing that he's sinking because his lack of faith. He's sinking because he took his eyes off of Jesus. But he is not too proud to look squarely back at Jesus and say, Jesus, I need you. Jesus, save me. Jesus, help me. Because in that moment, there was no one else. There was nothing else that he could do except for look to Jesus to save him. And it's what he did. Verse 31, we got to get this. This is so important. It says Jesus hesitated. Jesus sat there for a moment, and he looks at Peter, kind of puts his hands on his hips, and he's like, man, I don't know, Pete. You asked to get out of the water. I thought you were doing good. I thought you had this strong faith. I thought you were bold. I thought you were courageous. And then Peter, somehow you just lost your way. Peter, somehow you got taken up in all this other stuff going around. You got overwhelmed by the storm, by the wind and the waves, and you lost sight, Peter. I don't know, Peter. I don't know if it's worth it. It's not the last time you've messed up, Peter. And you know what, Peter? You're going to do it again. It's not what happens. It says Jesus immediately. Get it. Get this. Jesus immediately. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second guess. He didn't say, I don't know, Pete. You've disappointed me. Jesus immediately reaches out and he grabs him. I don't know if he grabbed him by the hand. I don't know if he grabbed him by the back of the neck. I don't know if he grabbed him by, I don't know how he grabbed him, but he grabbed him, right? But he immediately, he grabs him and he saves him. But here's the thing, we can't miss this either. What does Jesus say to Peter? Yes, he saves him, but he looks at Peter, and I believe in maybe the only way that Jesus can do it. He says, you have so little faith, Peter. Peter, why did you doubt? Peter, why did you doubt me? I'm thinking, man, Peter, we could have walked the rest of the way to the other side of the lake, just you and me, man. But you doubted. Your faith slipped. And so verse 32 says, when Jesus and Peter, when they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. The waves went away, the wind stopped, the storm ceased. Once again, Jesus performs a miracle in the midst of these disciples. And the disciples did what they only could do. There was no other response. They worshiped him. They said, you really are the Son of God. You are the Son of God. So this morning, similar to last week, this can't just be a story. This can't just be a, man, what a awesome thing. Like, what a miracle. Jesus walked on the water, and even Peter walked on the water too. We can't leave here without realizing, without understanding, without looking at what we just walked through. And we figure out, how do we apply this? Like there is something more than something. There are so many things that we can learn from this account, this event. And we can't walk out these doors without being challenged or encouraged or held accountable. We have to change. Like, none of us have arrived yet. None of us are perfect. None of us are the exact model of Jesus right now. Like, we need to continue to be conformed to the image of him. He needs to continue to change us and transform us. So what do we learn from this? And how should we apply it? And how should we walk out of here different than when we came in? And the first thing is this, is we need to understand that Jesus, he is present in and through the storms we face. Jesus is present in and through the storms that we face. I don't know what it is that you are facing today, but my guess is, if you're alive, you are facing a storm. Maybe your storm may be greater than someone else's. Maybe it's not a huge storm, but it's a storm nonetheless. Here's what we need to know. We need to know that Jesus is in the midst of the storm with us. He does not leave us alone. He does not abandon us. He does not forsake us. He is with us. He journeys alongside of us. He goes on ahead of us. He covers us from behind. Jesus is with us in the midst of the storm. Isaiah 43:2 says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not burn up. The flames will not set you ablaze. This is the God we serve. This is the Savior who died for us. And he journeys in and through the storms of our lives. The second thing is this, is fixing our eyes on Jesus helps us to overcome fear. As we fix our eyes on Jesus, when we gaze at him, when we see his perfectness and who he is, everything else fades away. The troubles of this life, the difficult circumstances that we are in, the storms that we find ourselves facing, when we fix our eyes on Jesus, everything else pales in comparison. And at that moment, when we fix our eyes on Jesus, we might be able to walk on water. The third thing is this: even in our weakness and doubt, Jesus forgives. Even in our weakness and doubt, Jesus forgives. I mean, Peter is in this incredibly vulnerable position. He has shown this weakness. He has shown that he has doubted. He has shown this unbelief or lack of faith. And yet, how does Jesus respond? Again, does he hesitate? Does he hold back? Does he kind of, sorry, Peter, you're on your own? No, Jesus is willing. He is available to forgive. He is available to save. But here is the deal. Peter had to do something. Like I believe this. I believe that as Peter's walking across the water, as he began to look at the wind and the waves and he began to sink, my guess is, speculation, this is my opinion, but if he says nothing, if he continues to walk and he says nothing and he starts to sink, my guess is that Peter sinks. But Peter was willing to humble himself in the face of Jesus. And he was willing to say to Jesus, Jesus, I need your help. Jesus, save me. And so I think that's for you and for me today. Man, we've got issues with pride. We have issues with image. We have issues with what others think about us. And we don't want people to know that we're hurting. We don't want people to know that we're broken. We don't want people to know that we need Jesus. And so we keep it bottled in. We don't want to let anybody know. Man, everything is great, man. My life is perfect. Just look at the picture of my family on Facebook. Everything is great. We need to cry out to Jesus for help. And when we do, immediately, Jesus is there. He is ready. He is willing to extend his grace, his mercy, his forgiveness. Here's the thing, we say to ourselves, no, you don't know what I've done. You don't know how many times. You don't know what I continue to deal with. You don't know the sin that I continue to commit. Here's the deal. If you haven't given in, if you're still fighting, if you're still wrestling, Jesus is still willing to forgive. But it is the moment when we just give up and we just give in and say, it's just who I am. Don't give up. Jesus is willing. He's available. And number 4, the last one is this, is having Jesus is greater than walking on water. I believe that if we could sit down and have coffee, if Peter drinks coffee, if we could sit down and have coffee with him, have a conversation, man, maybe you want to ask him about how was it? How was it walking on the water? I believe he'd say, it was pretty amazing. But it pales in comparison to knowing Jesus, to being in the presence of Jesus, to having a relationship with Jesus. There's no miracle. There's no miracle greater than a relationship with Jesus Christ. So I've got a couple questions this morning. What storm are you facing? What storm are you in the midst of? It's not too small. It's not too big. I think sometimes we think, well, it's too small for Jesus. I'm not gonna cry out for help. It's too small. He wants to know. He wants to help. He wants to heal. But don't think it's too big either. Jesus is in the business of doing the impossible, of doing miracles, of making things happen that we would never imagine. So I don't know what storm you're facing, but here's what I do know. There's something different about getting out of the boat. There's something different about stepping out, getting out of our comfort zone, not caring what's going on around us, not caring who might be watching, not caring what others might think. So there's not going to be a song. We're not going to have another worship song. But here's the deal. I'm going to pray in just a moment. But I encourage you this morning. If you're in a storm, if there's something going on in your life that you just need to cry out to Jesus for, whether it's physical, whether it's financial, whether it's relational, whether it's spiritual, I don't know what it is. But there's no better place than to meet him right here at this altar. And so for these next few moments, I'm going to pray. And I'm encouraging you, if you need Jesus to immediately show up, then I'm asking you to come forward, not caring what anybody else thinks, not caring what else is going on, but just knowing that you need Jesus. Heavenly Father, I don't believe that there's anything more important than a relationship with you. I truly believe with all of my heart. I believe that Peter would say the same thing, that this walking on the water, man, although it's incredible, man, amazing, it pales into comparison of being connected with Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, of our lives. But the thing is I realize, I understand, I believe that in order for you to show up in that way, I don't believe, Jesus, that you force yourself on anyone. Even though you know what's going on in our lives, nothing is hidden from you. But I believe it is your desire that we cry out to you, that we say, Jesus, I need you. I need your help. And when we humble ourselves, when we lay pride aside, it gives you the opportunity to work. It gives you the opportunity to do what only you can do. So I pray this morning for those who are in the midst of storms and trials, and they may not know what tomorrow holds. I pray that they realize, that they understand, and that they find, and that they lean on the one who does hold tomorrow. Because we know that you are faithful and that you are good and that you are ready. Whenever we are, you are ready and available to speak truth in our lives and to show up in ways that only you can. We pray all of this in your Son's name. Amen.